Let's see what the new studio session's about. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. It was only like 3 months ago that we documented the new Gibson Les Paul Studio, and here we go, we've got another new one, this time called the Studio Session. So tonight's video is going to be dedicated to reviewing this particular guitar, as well as exploring some of their differences to see if we can make some sense about it. You might recognize this particular one from my guitar hunting series when I said, oh yeah, that's the best studio session I've seen, so I decided to pick it up. So, the Studio Session is going to run you $2,000 brand new. But before we go any deeper, let's talk about the other studios that we've reviewed. About a year ago, Gibson came out with something called the Modern Studio. It was a revival of the Studio series, which was first introduced in 1983 as a stripped-down Les Paul without any of the fancy attributes, but it still had all the same electronics. But the Modern Studio had a satin finish, 490R, 498T pickups, but with a heel cut on the back, and the return of the ebony fretboard like the golden era early 90s Les Paul Studios. However, one of the specs that's kind of hard to see is they did indeed have black binding on the fretboard, but they offered them in Manhattan Midnight, Dark Purple Burst, Smokehouse, Worn White, and Wine Red finishes. Those ones also had the fancy electronics for coil splitting, phase inversion, and true bypass to the bridge. Whereas the regular The One Studio that was just recently relaunched is $400 cheaper at $1,599. It came equipped with the Burstbucker Pro pickups. It had a rosewood fretboard that was bound, no heel cut, but this one was an all gloss finish, but its pickups only coil splitted. It did not have the out of phase and direct to bridge, and had slightly different finish options with ebony, blueberry burst, a cherry sunburst, and a wine red. So now we've got the Studio Session. The best way to summarize this is it's a modern studio, except for we now have a gloss finish all over, because you still got the swoop on the heel cut, and now we have cream binding so you can actually see it on the fretboard, whereas this has stayed ebony, and most of the other specs have still rung true as far as like the black chrome hardware with your tuners, as well as your bridge. Now there's a few different options as far as colors. Some of them have the black plastics, other ones have cream. At launch, it's cobalt burst, trans ebony, bourbon burst, and honey burst. Something that's really cool about the honey burst and some of the other lighter colored finishes is if you look at the edge, they kind of have that natural exposed binding on the body because you can see the maple cap. And with these being billed as AA tops, whereas the other ones are just plain maple, sometimes you can even get like a flame binding effect to it. Unfortunately, I didn't go for that color because I really fell in love with the particular top on this one. It's just so nice. Not necessarily pinstripey, just a little bit wavy with some wood grain, but it's got the black back, so we don't get to appreciate that here. But this series is utilizing the underused 57 Classic, 57 Classic Plus. So that's a little bit more of a traditional pickup set, whereas the 490R, 498T is a little bit more biting, modern rock, maybe you could say. As far as the electronics, yeah, you've got everything from coil splitting, direct to bridge, and phase inversions. The gloss finish with a slightly flamier top really is the biggest difference here. So that leads me to my biggest wondering here. Is Gibson going to leave all three of those in production? I think one of them has to be redundant. It seems to make sense that we could chop out the Modern Studio. It's done its run of about a year, and it can just be a small, short-lived variation. However, that satin finish might appeal to certain players. In many ways, it seems The One could potentially be the next one to go, because it's $400 cheaper and seems to do things better than the Modern Studio if you like the gloss finish. And that's the easiest way for a company to raise a price. Come out with a new model. Because I'm in the unique position where I've reviewed all three, and if I saw all three of these at the store and they're all just labeled Studio, I'd kind of be confused, especially when one of them's $400 cheaper. The next thing is I kind of wish they would rename these. Studio Session doesn't roll off the tongue as much as Session Studio, in my opinion. I mean, I get it. If you're in a recording studio, you might say, let's have a studio session, and that's why they called it that. But I really wish they would have put Session on the truss rod cover to help differentiate it between the other studio models. But that's just my own thoughts on the topic. If I'm being honest here, it feels just like the other studios. Not much has really changed outside of some cosmetics. So it's probably going to be a very nice guitar. But ultimately, you'll notice all three of those studio offerings now have binding on the fretboard in some shape, form, or another. And I wonder if they're doing that to distance themselves from the used market where you can get a studio for a lot cheaper. And it kind of simplifies the production as far as Gibson USA is concerned, as far as what kind of fretboards they have to make. And as you saw earlier, all the studios come in this soft case gig bag type thing. They are pretty nice, but it makes me question, when an SG Special and a Les Paul Special come in a hardshell case for $16.99, why aren't the studios getting hardshell cases? I get that there's more going on with these studios as far as having a maple top to them. As far as additional case candy, looks like you get the very basic cloth Gibson strap. Got the Gibson app pamphlet. No multi-tool on this model, just a regular truss rod wrench. Our tiny pre-pack checklist. An Allen key for our bridge, as well as a polishing cloth. Then there is a poker chip in the case if you want to put it on. And for historical preservation, here's a look at the original box tag. But to learn more about this one, let's go ahead and throw it onto the workbench to take a look at its parts and specs. Let's go ahead and verify these specs. Are they truly 57 classics? They are. Rhythm 57 in the neck, and they're calling it Lead 57 Plus in the bridge. So that's a slightly new marking of them with having the rhythm and lead within the stickers, but I'm pretty sure the pickups are the same as before. But I do see a waxy residue, so that means these are potted pickups. The bridge reads 8.09 k ohms, neck 7.83, and our middle for fun 3.98. But let's see, with a PCB system, does it do the readings? No. Can anyone explain that? Why is it we can't get in-circuit readings on certain PCBs, but other ones we can? Because theoretically, these should read half as much. So this would be like 4, and this would be like 2 when it's split. However, the direct-to-bridge still works, because you can see it gets slightly hotter, because everything else is removed from the circuit, so it gives you just a little bit more biting of a tone. That's just a regular 2 volumes, 2 tones. And as we talked earlier, you've got push-pull pots on all 4 of them. Coil splits, out of phase, direct-to-bridge. As far as the pickup cavities, it's a short neck tenon, labeled E2 in the neck. Got a couple of wood splinters over there, but you can see your maple top joining onto the mahogany body. But the bridge pickup's kind of interesting. So LPST likely for Les Paul Studio, but then AA probably for the top. So interesting to not see the session branding anywhere. It's almost like that was an afterthought. Like, come on guys, we need to think of a new name for these slightly newer studios without just adding AA to the title. But these are black chrome pickup covers to match the hardware. So from far away they will look ebony, but if you get them in the light just right, they still shine like chrome. As far as our tailpiece, it's the regular API one. This is where that Allen key goes. It helps you adjust the thumb wheels without having to use them. It's a traditionally mounted Nashville style bridge. However, the tailpiece is different. This is a full weight tailpiece by API, and again, it's black chrome. Now, generally, I'm a pick guard on kind of guy, but this particular example, I'm definitely pick guard off, but something ruined that for me. The bottom side of the pick guard's like abrasive and it scratched up the finish, so it's like, ah, man. It wasn't the felt pad ruining my plan this time. In fact, a little bit more on that here in a second. If you haven't seen our other videos, sometimes that will react and buff down the finish in that area. However, I did notice when I took the pick guard off, there appears to be a more extreme carve away right there. So I wonder, is Gibson actually doing that on purpose to prevent the pick guard from touching and people complaining? Because if you come over here, look at how the light dances. It's a much more shallow angle, whereas you come over here, it becomes very sharp right here. Like, you can definitely feel it. But anyways, here's the backside of the pick guard that scratched up our finish. You can tell how that happened. And the pick guard itself, it just kind of looks cheap being single ply black, but you do have the black chrome bracket. So begrudgingly, I think I'll put the pick guard back on. But I've always been a big fan of the poker chip. Sure, it does a cover over the top a little bit, but I just don't think a Les Paul looks complete without it, so I went ahead and installed it. But from the factory, it was as you saw it unboxed. So we'll just take a second to appreciate our finish and wood grain. Lots of nice ringiness and even flame throughout. That's what made me fall in love with this one, but I really wish I would have went for the honey burst, even if it wasn't as good of a top. Because having that whole exposed maple cap is a thing that people have been wanting for a while. But no lies, this ebony burst is gorgeous. But moving on from the two-piece maple top, this is a modern weight relief body. All three of the studios have that. That's the V-cut looking one. Then it's got that slim tapered mahogany neck with an ebony fretboard. Now, I love ebony fretboarded studios, but honestly, I would have mistaken this for rosewood had I not read it on the spec sheet. It looks a little bit better now that I've conditioned it, but it's like really porous in the grain department, which not all ebony is. But we do now have the cream binding, as we were talking earlier, as well as our trapezoid inlays. And we've got our usual 22 medium jumbo style frets. As far as QC, you can see some over rounding / scraping of the edges has occurred on the edge of this board, just a little bit. And they definitely filed these sides in, maybe a little bit too much down here. There was some flaky residue that I was able to pick off. Here's another area with a few stray marks. But as far as like tooling marks into the board and on the top of the binding, they did a decent job on this one. As far as the nut width, 1.7 inches. That increases to 210 by the 12. But this neck is skinny, 0.8 first fret neck depth and 0.93 at the 12th. Here's a look at that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. Just a nice slim C. If you don't like flat feeling necks, you're not going to enjoy these studios. I really wish one of the offerings would have had a 50s neck, because this is definitely more so a modern slim taper. But hey, big news, I just found something else different. The modern studio has a compound radius fretboard, so you're talking like 10 to 14-ish. The studio session is like the regular studio, just having a 12-inch across the board. Now, whether or not that makes a difference to you, I think it depends on your skill level. Personally, I can get along with most fretboard radiuses, and I don't notice when there is a compound one. But somebody who's a little bit more skilled might be like, hey, I definitely want the modern studio because of that fact. But the neck profiles are all the same. There's no asymmetrical stuff going on here. Now moving on to the face of our headstock, get your beautiful Gibson mother of pearl logo, which is a step above the regular studios, like the modern studio, but again, this one is a gloss topped finish. And our truss rod cover just says studio. Now that I've got it all strung back up, I wanted to answer another question I see getting asked a lot. With this essentially having a standards neck on it as far as the face plate and the binding goes, just an ebony board. What is the difference between this and a standard? It's not just the binding on the body. Studios are actually thinner guitars to begin with. A regular Les Paul in this area is about 2 inches thick, whereas it's just shy of 1.8 inches here. And then they're usually in the ballpark of about 2.5 in the middle, whereas this is about 2.3. So basically, it's this much thinner than a regular Les Paul, which might not seem like a lot, but when you look at it here, it actually is quite sizable. This even visually looks quite slim. Now, is that a good or a bad thing? That depends on the person. If you want a lightweight guitar, that's going to help that a little bit. We also get things like the little swoop cut right here. It's not as good as the true Axis heel carve in my opinion. However, during the Matt Hafey review, I actually learned apparently some solo guys like to anchor their thumb right here, and that's why they like having a ledge yet. I don't play like that, so I would have never have known that was a thing. But it's a little under 1.7 inches in depth in this area. But now our electronics. Our cavity is actually very clean on this one. But it's your regular PCB. It's got the CTS push-pull pots in all locations. And if you don't like the 57 Classic pickups, any of Gibson's quick connects will fit in here that are the white plugins. So if you get an older model that has the black ones, they will not fit. Otherwise, output jack on the side, large black strap buttons in our usual locations. Nothing too much different about our toggle switch or route. And then we can run up the back side of the neck here before we get to our black chrome Grover tuners and our serial number dating this one to 2024, 304th day of the year, initial batch, production number 325, made in USA. Well said and done. This one weighs 8 pounds, 3.8 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how the 57 Classics sound. About you guys, but those almost sound like active EMGs. Wow. I'm gonna lower those pickups a little bit. bit better. Now let's compare them to its coil split self. Technically, the Gibson website calls those a tap, so they're not like just going completely half coiled. And you can kind of tell what they're doing there, because it's not really single coil. It certainly makes me appreciate the full humbucker mode more. Now our middle combinations. Don't forget, you can also toy around with out of phase there. So you've got that as an option. Now our direct to bridge, here's the regular bridge. And now everything else out of the circuit. So a very slight difference there depending on your needs. However, that feature is not necessarily just to differentiate your bridge. Say you're on your neck pickup and you have custom volume settings for each pickup. So rather than your bridge being full blast, you want it dialed back a bit. So regardless of where you are, you can get back to the bridge pickup with full blast, which is very helpful when you go to distortion, because you can go from this Now that we know all about the Session Studio, what are my honest final thoughts? Yeah, not a fan of any of this stuff. I mean, maybe the Director Bridge, but the stock bass humbuckers I thought were quite nice. That's what you would expect out of a 57, but I'm not sure they've exactly dialed that in with their tap. It just sounds inauthentic as compared to what I was hoping for, I guess is a good way to put it. Like, are there ways to use those tones? Sure, maybe my amp isn't set up the best for them. That might just be something you have to be a little bit more creative about. But as far as my personal preferences, not for me on that. However, that's what the great thing about the Quick Connect system is you can put whatever pickups in here that you do want. As far as the guitar itself, if you like the thin neck profile and you want a slightly more fancier option of a studio than has been offered in the past, yeah, it's a good option. However, if they were trying to dethrone the 90s studios as being the best, these just aren't quite it. They're almost too fancy to be a studio anymore. They've just got so much great stuff. However, at the same time, studios have always been expensive and I've never been able to suggest them. At least all these slightly higher end appointments to them makes it a bit easier to say, yeah, these are a better value than that they've offered in the past. So whether you go for the Studio Session, or the Studio Modern, really comes down to the Modern, satin finish, compound radius fretboard, black binding. This is the one if you want your super high gloss, normal looking guitar with a slightly better top. But if you could care less about the looks, you go for either a used one or the regular Studio and save yourself $400. So that's my take on the new Studio Session. It honestly doesn't feel like a new model at all. It's very similar to the One. It's just a little bit prettier and has different pickups. So if you're interested in being the next owner of this demo unit, you can find it for sale on my website. Otherwise, we'll catch you guys tomorrow on another exciting episode of the Trogly's Guitar Show. Take care.